I'm still going to get spikes of glucose throughout the day.
Yes.
And that's because of the way in which we glucose metabolize and the fact that we have these wonderful cells in our body, in our liver, that are able to take glucose metabolites and make glucose out of them
Yes.
through a process known as gluconeogenesis. And so, having that as a caveat,
Yes.
what the pitch here is that we don't want to spike glucose.
Yes.
We don't want to spike glucose in our body because spiking glucose is going to cause spikes in insulin. Spikes in insulin is going to, over time, is going to lead to type 2 diabetes. And that's not how type 2 diabetes develops.
Right.
In order to get a spike of insulin strictly from eating sugar, you need to consume over 1.2 grams per kilogram of body mass within an hour at one time.
Oh, wow.
So by pound, that's about 0.5456. So between zero point 0.5 and zero point 0.6 grams per pound of body mass.
Right.
If I drink a can of Coke,
Yes.
and I'm using Coke as a general term here, not as the company.
Right.
If I drink a can of pop for all of my
Soda. Yeah.
all of my northern New York family, Midwest family, that's about 39 grams
Yes.
of sugar, of glucose. That 39 grams for myself would not by itself spike insulin.
Yes.
But the sweetness that I get from the pop,
A few moments later.
that's how we got that diabetes mellitus versus diabetes insipidus, which is why it's not like diabetes as a single word. It's actually diabetes mellitus, which is why
Yes.
if you look at any of the abbreviations, it's always DM,
Yes.
diabetes mellitus. And so it's not a newfangled thing. But what we've noticed is that there is a rise in population that suffers from diabetic conditions,
Yes.
excessive blood glucose levels, excessive amounts of glucose being excreted from the body, all of those factors. And it comes down to metabolic disruptors, chronic inflammation. Metabolic disruptors and chronic inflammation, changing glucose metabolism, changing metabolic flexibility within tissues, causing glucose sparing events. And so when we talk about glucose sparing event, what ends up happening is that the liver releases more glucose from its stores, muscle breaks down glycogen stores, but they don't take in glycogen. They don't take in glucose. Glucose stays in circulation for neurons, which are glucose dependent cells. They're not glucose obligate. They can use other fuel sources besides glucose.
Mhm.
But all blood cells are glucose obligated tissues. They're glucose obligated cells. They only use
Yes.
glucose for their fuel sources.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm sick, when I have inflammation,
Mm-hmm.
immune cells go into overactivity.
Yes.
Their need for fuels goes up,
Yes.
which means I'm sending out these metabolic signals to say, hey, you need to make sure there's glucose in the bloodstream and in the lymph stream, in lymph and in blood for all of the white blood cells,
Mm-hmm.
all of the other blood cells to be able
Yes.
to do what they need to do in order to combat this inflammation.
Right.
Whether it's inflammation because I'm sick, actually have an infection, whether it's inflammation because I'm overstressed, because stress
Oh,
causes inflammation,
right. Cortisol and all that.
cortisol and all of that, and all those fun inflammatory hormones. But
Right.
cortisol is only one half of the picture.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's interleukins, in particular IL-1, IL-2, and IL-6,
Right.
that are going to be at play in terms of my immune cell activity and the need for glucose in those tissues.
Yes.
because we have decided to live in an excessively stressful world with very poor stress management skills
True.
and ever decreasing amounts of physical activity,
Mm-hmm.
we have raised our level of chronic inflammation taking place. We have raised levels of chronic inflammation, which triggers all of this glucose sparing to take place. Even though there's no inflammation taking place, it's simply stress.
Right.
That stress leads to ROS issues, which leads to degenerative issues. That excess stress causes spiking and chronic high levels of glucose because of glucose sparing,
Mm-hmm.
which triggers metabolic inflexibility, the inability to use glucose and lipids and proteins for ATP purposes.
Yes.
It triggers changes in my hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, my